It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon in the heart of downtown Los Angeles. The sky was a deep, heavy gray, and the rain was hammering against the tall glass windows of the city's most prestigious bank branch. Inside, however, everything was quiet, polished, and smelled of expensive coffee and fresh leather. This was a place where people wore suits that cost more than cars, and where the silence was broken only by the soft clicking of pens and the hushed whispers of important deals. Behind the bulletproof glass at the main counter, a young teller was trying to look busy. She was organizing a stack of deposit slips, straightening the edges until they were perfectly aligned. It had been a slow day, and she was secretly counting down the minutes until her break. Suddenly, the heavy glass doors at the front of the bank swung open. A gust of wet, cold wind rushed into the lobby, rattling the potted plants in the corner. The teller looked up, along with everyone else in the quiet lobby. Walking through the doors was a man who looked completely out of place. He wasn't wearing a tailored suit. He wasn't carrying a briefcase. Instead, he was dressed in a worn-out leather jacket that had clearly seen better days. Underneath it, he wore a simple t-shirt and a pair of faded jeans that were splattered with mud and rain. On his feet were heavy, scuffed motorcycle boots that thudded loudly against the pristine marble floor as he walked. Tucked under one arm was a dusty black motorcycle helmet. He had a backpack slung over one shoulder, looking heavy and burdened. His hair was messy, damp from the rain, and he looked tired. He didn't walk with the confident, hurried stride of the wealthy businessmen usually seen here. He walked slowly, a bit hunched over, like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. A few customers standing in line exchanged looks. One woman in a designer coat suddenly stepped aside, pulling her expensive purse closer to her body, as if the man's presence might somehow dirty her belongings. A security guard near the entrance perked up, his eyes following the stranger's movements across the floor. The man didn't seem to notice the stares, or maybe he was just used to them. He kept his head down, his eyes scanning the numbers above the teller stations. The teller watched him approach. She tried to keep her face neutral, but she couldn't help but feel a ripple of anxiety. This wasn't the usual clientele. Usually, people who looked like him came in to cash a small check or to ask for change, and they often caused a scene if things didn't go their way. She braced herself, putting on her professional customer service smile. The man finally reached the front of the line. He stopped in front of her window and set his heavy helmet down on the marble counter with a soft thud. He looked at her through the glass, and for a second, his dark eyes seemed incredibly kind, despite his rough appearance. "Hi there," he said. His voice was deep and quiet, with a raspy edge to it. "How are you doing today?" The teller blinked, surprised by how polite he was. "I'm doing well, sir. How can I help you?" The man nodded, a small, almost shy smile crossing his face. "That's good. I was hoping to make a deposit. It's a bit of a large amount, and the check is, well, it's from a recent job, so I just want to make sure it goes through the right way." He reached into the pocket of his leather jacket. The teller watched his hand, expecting him to pull out a wrinkled wad of cash or maybe a check for a few $100s. Instead, he pulled out a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it carefully, smoothing it out on the counter, and then slid it under the glass divider. The teller looked down. Her breath caught in her throat. It was a check. A standard check, but the numbers written on it were unlike anything she had seen in her years of working at this branch. In the little box for the amount, it said, $10 million. And written out in words, it read, $10 million. She stared at it. She blinked, Sure, she was seeing things. She looked at the name on the check, paid to the order of Keanu Reeves. Then she looked up at the man standing in front of her. The messy hair. The worn jacket. The muddy boots. Is this a joke, she thought. Panic started to rise in her chest. It had to be a prank. Maybe he was an actor, or maybe this was some social media stunt. But he looked so serious. He was standing there patiently, waiting for her to type the numbers in, looking as if he was just depositing $50 for groceries. Sir, she stammered, her voice shaking slightly. This is for $10 million. The man nodded calmly. Yeah. Like I said, it's from the movie project. I just finished it up and wanted to get it into the account. The teller's hands hovered over her keyboard. She didn't know what to do. Her screen had a warning prompt for any deposit over $5,000 that required extra ID verification. But this was 10 million. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. If this was a fake check, and she processed it, she could lose her job. If she refused it, and it was real, she could lose her job. She looked past the man, toward the back of the bank where the offices were. Through the glass walls of the manager's office, she could see Mr. Sterling, the branch manager, sitting at his desk. He was an older man with silver hair and a face that always looked like he was smelling something bad. He was strict, obsessed with appearances, and hated anything that disrupted the order of his bank. The teller looked back at the man. I think I need to get some assistance with this transaction. It's a large sum, and I have to follow protocol. The man didn't get annoyed. He didn't roll his eyes. Of course, he said softly. Take your time. I completely understand. He stepped back slightly, allowing the next person in line to approach the neighboring window. He stood there, staring down at his boots, looking completely harmless. The teller picked up the phone on her desk and dialed the extension for the manager's office. She watched him pick up the phone. Mr. Sterling, she whispered, her voice trembling. I have a gentleman at window 4. He wants to deposit a check for $10 million. On the other end of the line, she heard a scoff. 10 million, don't be ridiculous, Jennifer. Is he one of those lottery winners or another prankster? No, sir, she whispered, glancing at the man to make sure he couldn't hear. But the check looks real. And the name? What name? It says Keanu Reeves, sir. But, it doesn't look like him. The man looks like a biker. He's dirty, Mr. Sterling. He's wearing a leather jacket and... Listen to me, the manager's voice cut her off, sharp and cold. Do not process that check. I am coming out there. If this is some kind of joke, I want him removed immediately. We have a reputation to maintain. I won't have my bank turned into a circus. The line went dead. The teller hung up the phone, her face pale. She looked at the man standing at her window. He was just standing there, looking at a painting on the wall, completely unaware of the storm that was about to break over his head. Through the glass wall of the office, she saw Mr. Sterling stand up. He straightened his tie, smoothed his expensive suit jacket, and marched toward the door with a look of pure determination on his face. He wasn't coming out to help a customer, he was coming out to hunt down a problem. The teller swallowed hard, a knot of dread forming in her stomach. She had a very bad feeling about this. The man at the window turned back to her and gave her another small, polite smile. Is everything okay? He asked gently. No rush. She forced a shaky smile, unable to find her voice. She just nodded, watching as the manager emerged from the back and began to stride across the marble floor, his eyes locked on the leather-clad stranger with the $10 million check. The sound of Mr. Sterling's expensive leather shoes clicking against the marble floor echoed through the lobby, cutting through the quiet hum of the bank like a knife. Every step he took was calculated and loud, announcing his authority before he even said a word. He didn't walk, he marched, his shoulders back and his chin held high, his eyes fixed solely on the man in the worn-out leather jacket standing at the counter. The teller, whose heart was now beating so fast she could feel it in her throat, shrank back against her chair. She wanted to warn the customer, to tell him to run or to at least hide the check, but she was paralyzed by the sheer force of Sterling's presence. She watched helplessly as the manager arrived at the window and positioned himself directly between the customer and the rest of the lobby, as if to block the view. "What is going on here?" Sterling demanded. His voice was loud, causing an elderly woman sitting in the waiting area to jump in her seat. He didn't look at the teller. He stared straight at the man, his eyes narrowing with judgment. The man in the leather jacket didn't flinch. He turned slowly, his calm demeanor clashing sharply with the manager's aggression. He looked Sterling in the eye and spoke in that same quiet, raspy voice. "Good afternoon. I was just explaining to the teller that I have a check to deposit. It is for a significant amount, so she called for assistance." Sterling let out a sharp, sarcastic laugh. He looked the man up and down, taking in the wet hair, the dirty jeans, and the scuffed boots. He didn't try to hide his disgust. He waved his hand dismissively in the air, as if he was shooing away a bad smell. "A significant amount," Sterling repeated, mocking the man's polite tone. "Son, I don't know what kind of game you are playing, but this is a place of business. Serious business. We do not have time for pranks or role-playing games here." The man looked genuinely confused. He frowned slightly, tilting his head. "I am not playing a game. This is a legitimate check from my work. I simply want to put it into my account." Sterling leaned over the counter, invading the man's personal space. He gestured for the teller to slide the check forward. The teller hesitated, her hand trembling, but Sterling snapped his fingers, and she quickly pushed the piece of paper toward him. Sterling picked up the check by its very corner, holding it as if it were contaminated. He squinted at it, his eyes scanning the numbers. A look of pure disbelief washed over his face, followed quickly by a cold, hard smirk. He dropped the check back onto the counter with a loud thwop. $10 million, Sterling barked out a laugh, turning his head to address the people in the line behind him. "Did everyone hear that this gentleman thinks he is depositing $10 million? A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd, but mostly there was an uncomfortable silence. People shifted their weight, looking at their shoes, not wanting to get involved. The man at the counter, however, didn't laugh. He just stood there, his patience beginning to fray at the edges. "I can assure you, the funds are real," the man said, his voice a little firmer this time. "If you verify the routing number and the account it is coming from, you will see it is from a major studio. This is money I earned." Sterling's face darkened. He didn't like being contradicted, especially not by someone he considered to be beneath him. He leaned in closer, his face inches from the glass. "Listen to me, and listen closely," Sterling hissed, dropping his voice to a threatening growl. "I have been in this business for 30 years. I have handled accounts for senators, CEOs, and actual movie stars. And I am telling you, you are not fooling anyone. You walk in here dressed like a beggar, off the street, expecting us to believe you have a check for $10 million. It is an insult to my intelligence. I am on my way from a set, the man explained reasonably, gesturing to his helmet. I ride a motorcycle. I didn't think I had to wear a tuxedo to deposit a check at my own bank. You think this is a joke? Sterling slammed his hand on the counter, making the teller jump again. This is fraud. That is what this is. You probably printed that check in your basement. You are trying to steal money, and I am not going to let it happen. The teller couldn't take it anymore. She leaned forward, her voice squeaking. Sir, Mr. Sterling, he has ID. The name on the ID matches the check. Sterling whipped his head around to glare at her. Did I ask you to speak? No, I am handling this. He turned back to the man, his face red with anger. I don't care if you have a fake ID. I don't care if you have a wig and a costume. You are not depositing anything here today. In fact, I am calling the police. The man took a deep breath. It was clear he was trying very hard to control his temper. He reached into his jacket pocket slowly, making sure Sterling could see his hand. Look, he said, pulling out a simple, worn leather wallet. I just want to put this money in the bank. Why are you making this so difficult? Here is my license. Here are some credit cards with my name on them. Please, just look. He held the license up against the glass. It was a standard California driver's license. The photo matched his face perfectly. The name was printed clearly in bold letters, Keanu Reeves. Sterling didn't even look at it. He stared at the man's face, looking for any crack, any sign that he was lying. But all he saw was frustration and exhaustion. The manager's ego was too big to back down now. He had already accused the man of fraud in front of the entire bank. If he admitted he was wrong now, he would look like a fool. So, he chose to double down. I don't need to see that trash, Sterling said, knocking the wallet away with the back of his hand. Get out. Get out of my bank before I have security drag you out by the collar of that dirty jacket. The man froze. He looked at his wallet, which had fallen onto the counter, and then back up at the manager. The air between them became incredibly heavy. For a moment, the lobby was completely silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. You just knocked my wallet, the man said quietly. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. There was a dangerous edge to his voice now, a hardness that hadn't been there before. And I will do worse if you don't leave, Sterling spat back, feeling a surge of adrenaline. He felt powerful. He felt like he was protecting the fortress of wealth from the invading poor. You are a scammer. You are a nobody. And you are never coming back into this branch as long as I am the manager. The man looked Sterling dead in the eyes. The sadness in his face was gone, replaced by a look of intense disappointment. It was the look a parent gives a child who has done something terrible and doesn't even realize it. You are making a very big mistake, the man said. His words were simple, but they carried a heavy weight. I have been a customer of this bank for a long time. I have never been treated with such disrespect in my life. Respect is earned, son, Sterling sneered. And it is certainly not given to people who try to cheat the system. Now, get out. The man stood there for one more long second. He looked at the teller, who was sitting with tears in her eyes, shaking with fear. He gave her a small, pitying nod, as if to say it's okay, this isn't your fault. Then, he reached out and calmly picked up the check from the counter. He folded it slowly and placed it back into his pocket. He picked up his helmet and his wallet. You are right about one thing, the man said, turning toward the exit. I am leaving. Good, Sterling shouted after him, his chest puffed out. And don't bother coming back. We have real customers to serve. The man didn't turn around. He just walked toward the glass doors, his boots thudding softly on the floor. The crowd watched him go, many of them whispering to each other. The tension in the room was suffocating. As the automatic door slid open, the cool, rainy air blew into the lobby again. The man stepped out into the rain, disappearing into the gray afternoon. Sterling stood there for a moment, breathing hard, enjoying the feeling of victory. He smoothed down his suit jacket and turned to the terrified teller. And you, he snapped. Get back to work. And next time, use your common sense before calling me over for a waste of time. He turned and marched back toward his office, feeling like the hero of the story. He had protected the bank. He had maintained order. He had no idea that he had just made the worst mistake of his career. Behind him, the teller looked down at her computer screen, her fingers trembling over the keyboard. She pulled up the account details one more time, seeing the balance history that went back years, seeing the massive transfers that came and went regularly. Oh no, she whispered to the empty room. You really did it this time, sir. You really did it? The heavy glass door slid shut with a soft mechanical hiss, cutting off the cold, rainy wind from the outside. Inside the bank, the air felt heavy and thick, like the atmosphere just before a thunderstorm breaks. The silence that followed the man's departure was uncomfortable. It wasn't the peaceful silence of a library, it was the shocked, awkward silence that falls over a room when everyone has just witnessed a disaster but no one wants to admit it. Mr. Sterling stood near the center of the lobby for a moment, smoothing down the front of his suit jacket. He looked around at the customers, his chest puffed out, daring anyone to meet his eyes. Most people quickly looked away, pretending to be fascinated by their phones or the paperwork in their hands. They didn't want to be his next target. Sterling took this silence as respect. He nodded to himself, satisfied that he had maintained order and protected the bank's dignity from a fraudster. He turned sharply on his heel and marched back toward his glass office at the rear of the branch. As he walked, he loosened his tie slightly, feeling the heat of adrenaline in his cheeks. To him, the man in the leather jacket was just another symptom of a chaotic world, people thinking they could just walk in and take whatever they wanted. Sterling felt good about stopping him. He felt like a guardian of the high standards the bank represented. Inside the glass office, Sterling sank into his expensive leather chair and spun around to face the window. He watched the rain streaking down the glass, looking out at the gray city. He let out a long breath, convinced he had done the right thing. Street trash, he muttered to himself, shaking his head. The nerve of some people. Back at the front counter, the young teller was not feeling the same sense of victory. She felt like she was going to be sick. Her hands were shaking so badly that she had to clutch them together in her lap to keep them from spilling over the stack of deposit slips. The man's face kept flashing in her mind, the kindness in his eyes, the patience he had shown even when Sterling was screaming at him. And then, the look of disappointment when he finally left. She looked down at her computer screen. The cursor was blinking at her, waiting for her to close the transaction file. But she couldn't move. The name on the deposit slip was still burning in her vision. Keanu Reeves? It was a common name, sure. There were probably hundreds of Keanu Reeveses in the phone book. But that check, the check had looked incredibly real. The paper texture, the watermarks, the font, it was a corporate check from a major production studio. She glanced toward the manager's office. Sterling was facing away from her, looking out the window. He wasn't paying attention. Slowly, nervously, the teller typed the name into the bank's internal search engine. She just needed to prove to herself that she was crazy. She needed to see that the Keanu Reeves who banked here was someone else, or that the account was empty, or that it was closed years ago. She hit enter. The screen loaded for a second, and then a profile popped up. It was a platinum priority account, the highest tier the bank offered. The teller held her breath as she clicked on the client details. A photo loaded in the corner of the screen. It was a professional headshot, likely taken for the bank's private banking records. The man in the photo was smiling, clean-shaven, wearing a suit. But the face was exactly the same as the man who had just walked out the door. It was him. The teller felt the blood drain from her face. She quickly scanned the account history. Her eyes went wide. There were regular deposits in the millions, payments from film studios, investment returns, stock dividends. And there were notes on the account from previous branch managers in other cities. Client is extremely private and low maintenance. Treat with courtesy and discretion. Oh my God, she whispered, the words barely escaping her throat. Oh my God. She wasn't just crazy. The manager wasn't just rude. Mr. Sterling had just kicked out one of the most famous actors in the world and one of the bank's wealthiest private clients. And not only that, he had refused a $10 million deposit. She sat there, paralyzed by fear. She knew she had to tell him. But how Sterling was in a foul mood, and he hated being contradicted. If she went in there and told him he made a mistake, he would probably yell at her again. He might even fire her for questioning his authority. But if she didn't tell him, and he found out later, it would be even worse. Suddenly, a notification popped up on her screen. It was an alert from the bank's central server. It read, "High-value transaction alert, transfer request initiated." The teller stared at it. It was coming from the account she was looking at. The account holder was moving his money. She clicked on the alert. The screen showed a transfer request for the entire balance of the account to a rival bank across town. The note attached to the transfer was short and simple, closing account due to poor service. Management issues. The teller gasped out loud. It was really happening. He was taking it all out. $10 million, plus whatever else he had in there. She jumped up from her chair, knocking her stapler onto the floor. She didn't care. She had to stop Sterling before this transfer finalized. She ran from behind the counter, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. The security guard looked at her, surprised by her sudden movement, but she ignored him. She sprinted to the back of the bank and stopped in front of the glass door of the manager's office. She knocked, harder than she meant to. "Mr. Sterling." "Sir." Sterling jumped in his chair. He spun around, a look of fury on his face. He had been enjoying his moment of peace and was angry at the intrusion. He pointed a finger at her. "What did I tell you about disturbing me?" he shouted through the glass. "I thought I made myself clear." She pushed the door open and stepped inside, despite him not inviting her in. "Sir, please. You have to stop. You have to listen to me." Sterling stood up, his face turning red. "Get out of my office. Do you have any idea how insubordinate you are being? I should fire you right this second." "It's him!" she cried out, her voice cracking with panic. "The man. It really was him. I looked him up. It's Keanu Reeves, sir." He has a platinum account. Look. She grabbed a tablet from the desk and shoved it toward him, her finger trembling on the screen displaying the photo and the account history. Sterling looked at the tablet, ready to swat it away. But his eyes caught the photo. He stopped. He looked at the professional headshot on the screen, and then his mind flashed back to the face of the man in the leather jacket. The beard, the hair, the eyes, it was the same person. Just without the mud and the helmet. His mouth fell open slightly. He looked at the account balance. It was staggering. He looked at the transaction history. It was legitimate. Then, he saw the bright red notification flashing on the screen, transfer in progress. Closing account. The color drained from Sterling's face so fast that he looked like he had seen a ghost. His knees felt weak, and he sat back down heavily in his chair. The room seemed to spin. The arrogance, the power, the victory he had felt just minutes ago, it all evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, gripping fear. He is moving the money, Sterling whispered, staring at the screen as if it were a bomb about to go off. Yes, the teller said, tears now streaming down her face. And sir, he put a note on it. He said he is leaving because of the way he was treated. Sterling's hands began to shake. He grabbed the phone, his fingers fumbling as he tried to dial the number for the customer service department to stop the transfer, but he dropped the receiver. It clattered against the desk. He looked up at the teller, his eyes wide and terrified. "Why didn't you show me this earlier?" he yelled, but his voice was weak now. It lacked the bite it had before. "I tried, sir," she sobbed. "I tried to tell you about the ID, but you wouldn't listen. You said it was fake." Sterling ignored her. He finally managed to pick up the phone. He dialed the transfer department extension, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "Stop it," he whispered to himself. "Please, stop it." "Transfer department, this is Brenda," a voice answered on the other end. "This is Mr. Sterling at the downtown branch." He shouted into the phone. "I need you to freeze a transfer immediately. Code red. It's the Reeves account. Do not let that money go out." There was a pause on the line. "I'm sorry, sir," the voice came back, sounding confused and mechanical. "The transfer request has a biometric authorization. It was approved via the mobile app 30 seconds ago. The funds have already been debited. The transaction is irreversible." The phone slipped from Sterling's hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. He sat frozen, staring at the rain on the window. It was over. The $10 million was gone. The celebrity client was gone. And standing in his office, looking at him with a mixture of pity and fear, was the witness to his destruction. He looked at the teller. "What have I done?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The teller didn't have an answer. She just stood there, watching her boss crumble under the weight of his own massive mistake. Outside, the rain kept falling, washing away the city, but it couldn't wash away the damage done inside that bank. The phone receiver dangled from the side of the mahogany desk, swaying gently back and forth like a pendulum marking the end of a life. On the other end of the line, the dial tone hummed a monotonous, flat note that seemed to fill the entire office. Mr. Sterling sat frozen in his leather chair, his hands gripping the armrests so tightly his knuckles had turned a ghostly white. The young teller stood near the door, her back pressed against the wall. She was wiping her eyes with a crumpled tissue, terrified to make a sound. The only noise in the room was the heavy, ragged breathing of the manager, who looked as though he had just received a physical blow to the stomach. "Gone," Sterling whispered, the word barely audible. It's actually gone. He stared at the computer tablet sitting on his desk. The numbers that had once represented a massive fortune were now replaced by a zero balance notification. The screen felt like an accusation, glowing brightly in the dim office. $10 million. It wasn't just the money, it was the prestige of having a celebrity client, the commissions, the bragging rights. All of it had vanished in a matter of minutes because he couldn't look past a dirty jacket and a pair of muddy boots. "We have to fix this," Sterling suddenly shouted, his voice cracking as he bolted upright. He lunged for the phone, knocking over a stack of papers in his haste. "I can fix this. I just need to explain. It was a misunderstanding. He has to understand that." The teller watched him with sad eyes. "Sir, he sent a note," she said softly. "He said the service was poor. I don't think he wants to hear an explanation. He doesn't know who I am." Sterling yelled, stabbing numbers into the phone keypad. "I am a professional. I run this branch. He can't just walk out because of a little altercation. I'll call his agent. I'll call the studio. I'll personally go to his house." He dialed the number listed on the account profile, praying for an answer. It rang once. Twice. 3 times. Then, a smooth, automated voice picked up. "The subscriber you are calling is busy. Please try again later." Sterling slammed the phone down. "He blocked us," he muttered, staring at the device in disbelief. "He's blocking the bank." He started pacing the small office, his expensive shoes scuffing the carpet. He was sweating now, beads of perspiration gathering on his forehead. It was his fault, he muttered, talking to himself, trying to rewrite the narrative in his own head. Who dresses like that? Who walks into a high-end financial institution looking like a mechanic? It was a test. He was testing me. He wanted to see if I would treat him like a normal person, and I failed. The teller shook her head, pushing herself off the wall. She felt a sudden surge of courage amidst the manager's breakdown. "Sir, no," she said, her voice steadying. "He wasn't testing you. He just wanted to deposit a check. He was polite. He was kind. You were the one who yelled. You were the one who knocked his wallet. You made it about his clothes. That wasn't a test. That was just you being mean." Sterling stopped pacing and glared at her. He opened his mouth to scold her, to fire her on the spot for her insolence, but the words died in his throat. Deep down, in a dark corner of his mind he had been avoiding for years, he knew she was right. He had a problem with arrogance. He looked down on people who didn't have the same symbols of wealth he had. And today, that arrogance had cost him everything. "Get out," Sterling whispered, collapsing back into his chair. "Just, go finish your shift. And don't say a word to anyone. Do you hear me? Not a word." The teller nodded, slipped out the door, and gently closed it behind her. Sterling was left alone in the glass fishbowl. He put his head in his hands, the smell of his own cologne suddenly sickening to him. Outside his office, the bank was closing. The security guards were locking the doors. The day was ending, but his nightmare was just beginning. Meanwhile, across town, the atmosphere was completely different. In a quiet, dimly lit coffee shop, the man in the leather jacket sat at a small corner table. The rain had stopped, leaving the city streets glistening under the streetlights. He was sipping a black coffee, his helmet resting on the chair across from him. He took out his phone and stared at the screen. The banking app showed a simple confirmation, Transfer complete. He let out a long sigh, a sound of relief mixed with exhaustion. It wasn't about the money for him. He had plenty of money. It was about the principle. He remembered the way the manager had looked at him, the disgust, the judgment. It reminded him of why he hated dealing with banks, why he preferred to keep his life simple. He had hoped that maybe, just maybe, he could walk in and be treated like a human being. But the manager had seen a costume, not a person. The actor typed a quick message on his phone to his business manager. Move all funds to the new bank. I'm done with that branch. He hit send, put his phone in his pocket, and picked up his coffee. He didn't look angry. He just looked tired. He took a sip, wiped his mustache with a napkin, and stood up to leave. The world would find out soon enough, but for now, he just wanted to go home and ride his motorcycle in the quiet canyons away from the city. Back at the bank, the lights were flicking off, but Sterling remained in his office, buried in the dark. His phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text message from a friend who lived in New York. Did you see this video trending online? The message read. Some bank manager in LA just got caught on camera screaming at a homeless guy. Wait, people are saying the homeless guy is Keanu Reeves. Is this near you? Sterling's blood turned to ice. He felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He clicked the link with a trembling finger. The video loaded. It was shaky, taken from a smartphone by someone standing in the line. The audio was muffled but clear enough. He saw himself, red-faced and screaming. He heard his own voice shouting, "Get out of my bank." He saw himself knocking the wallet. He watched the teller cower. And then, the camera panned to the man in the leather jacket, looking calm and hurt. The video had already been viewed 2 million times. The caption underneath read, "This manager just kicked out one of the nicest guys in Hollywood because he didn't like his clothes. Shame on the bank, Keanu Reeves." Sterling scrolled down to the comments. They were a flood of anger. "I hope this guy gets fired. Who does he think he is? Keanu is a national treasure. Treat him with respect. Boycott this bank." Panic, raw and blinding, seized Sterling. He wasn't just worried about his job anymore, he was worried about his life. His face was now the face of corporate greed and arrogance to the entire world. He stood up and looked out his window at the street below. Even from the 5th floor, he could see a crowd gathering. News vans were pulling up to the curb. Reporters were setting up cameras under the bank's glowing sign. He was trapped. The glass walls of his office, which usually made him feel powerful and important, now felt like a prison cell. He watched the red lights of the TV cameras blinking in the dark, knowing that they were there for him. The story was no longer about a deposit, it was about a villain. And he was the villain in the script. His desk phone rang again, shattering the silence. It was a different ringtone this time, the sharp, urgent trill of the emergency line from the corporate headquarters in New York. Sterling stared at the phone. It rang and rang. He knew who it was. It was the regional director. It was the legal team. It was the end of the line. He didn't answer. He couldn't answer. He just sat there in the dark, watching the chaos unfold on the street below, realizing that his arrogance hadn't just cost the bank a client, it had cost him his career. The rain began to fall again, washing the streets, but nothing could wash away the mess Mr. Sterling had made. He buried his face in his hands, the sound of the phone ringing in his ears like a judgment bell that would never stop. The red light on the desk phone kept blinking, cutting through the darkness of the office like a warning siren. Sterling stared at it, his hand hovering over the receiver, terrified to touch it. He knew exactly who was on the other end of that line. It wasn't a regional manager anymore. It was the executive board. The people who signed his paycheck. The people who owned the building he was sitting in. With a shaking hand, he finally lifted the receiver and pressed it to his ear. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer some kind of explanation, to apologize, but the voice on the other end cut him off instantly. "Don't speak, Sterling," a cold, sharp voice said. "Just listen. We have seen the video. We have seen the transfer logs. And we have seen the news outside your building." Sterling swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Sir, I can explain. I thought he was a fraud. He looked." "Silence," the voice snapped. "It does not matter what he looked like. It matters how you behaved. You insulted a client of immense value. You violated our code of conduct. You have embarrassed this institution on a global scale. Do you have any idea how much damage control we are doing right now?" I didn't mean to," Sterling whispered, tears stinging his eyes. "Effective immediately, you are terminated," the voice said, without a hint of hesitation. "Security is on their way up to your office to escort you out. Do not touch your computer. Do not take any files. Just take your personal belongings and leave. Your access card will be deactivated by the time you reach the elevator." The line went dead. Sterling sat there, the phone still pressed to his ear, listening to the dial tone. It was the sound of his career ending. 30 years of climbing the corporate ladder. 30 years of sacrifices, late nights, and weekends spent working. All of it gone. Destroyed not by a market crash or a banking scandal, but by his own pride. He had let his ego make the decision for him, and now he was paying the ultimate price. Slowly, mechanically, he stood up. He walked over to the corner of the office where he kept his personal things. His hands moved like they belonged to someone else. He took down a framed photo of his family. He picked up his expensive gold watch. He grabbed a small plant his daughter had given him for his birthday last month. He found a cardboard box under the desk, usually used for reams of paper. He placed his items inside, one by one. The sound of his life being packed into a cheap box was deafening in the quiet room. It felt so final. So small. There was a heavy knock on the office door. Sterling jumped. It wasn't a polite knock, it was authoritative. The door opened, and 2 security guards walked in. They weren't the usual guards who chatted with him about football on Sundays. These were corporate security, dressed in sharp suits, wearing earpieces, with stone-cold expressions on their faces. "Mr. Sterling," one of them said. "It is time to go." Sterling nodded. He couldn't find his voice. He picked up his box and followed them out of the office. As he walked through the main floor of the bank, the atmosphere had completely changed. It was after hours, so the customers were gone, but the staff was still there. Tellers, loan officers, and managers were standing at their desks, watching him. Nobody said a word. There was no whispering, no giggling, just a heavy, suffocating silence. They all knew. They had all seen the video. They all knew he was the man who had yelled at Keanu Reeves. He saw the looks on their faces: pity, judgment, and in some cases, satisfaction. He realized then that he hadn't been a well-liked boss. He had been feared, but not respected. And now that he had fallen, no one was sad to see him go. He walked past the young teller who had tried to warn him. She was standing near her station, her arms folded. She looked at him, and for a second, their eyes met. Sterling wanted to apologize. He wanted to say he was sorry for yelling at her, sorry for knocking the wallet. But the words stuck in his throat. He looked down at his shoes and kept walking, the box of belongings feeling incredibly heavy in his arms. They reached the elevator. The security guard pressed the button for the ground floor. The door slid open, and Sterling stepped inside. The guard stayed on the main floor. As the doors began to close, Sterling saw the staff turn away, going back to their work, erasing him from their minds. The ride down to the lobby felt like the longest journey of his life. The numbers ticked down slowly. 5, 4, 3. Sterling took a deep breath, preparing himself for what was waiting for him on the street. He knew it wasn't going to be a quiet walk to his car. The bell dinged. The doors opened. The noise hit him like a physical wave. Even through the thick glass of the bank lobby, he could hear the roar of the crowd. He stepped out of the elevator and walked toward the front doors. The lobby was bathed in the flashing lights of police cruisers and news vans. Red and blue lights spun across the marble walls, creating a dizzying, chaotic light show. Sterling approached the glass doors. He could see a sea of people outside. Reporters holding microphones, cameramen with massive lights on their shoulders, and a crowd of onlookers holding up their phones, recording everything. He pushed the door open. The moment he stepped onto the sidewalk, the crowd exploded. "Mr. Sterling. Why did you do it? How does it feel to lose your job? Do you owe Keanu Reeves an apology? Look over here. Give us a statement." Microphones were shoved in his face. Cameras blinded him. He felt like a trapped animal. He pulled his head down, clutching his cardboard box against his chest like a shield. He tried to push through the crowd, but there were too many of them. "Excuse me," he muttered, his voice trembling. "Please let me through. Tell us about the check." A reporter shouted, getting right in his face. "Was it real? Did you know it was real?" Sterling kept walking, his eyes fixed on the pavement. He felt someone grab his jacket, trying to pull him back for a comment. He shook them off, terrified. He had never felt so small in his entire life. Just an hour ago, he had been the king of this building. Now, he was public enemy number one. He saw a gap in the crowd and bolted. He didn't run like an athlete, he ran like a frightened old man. He scrambled toward the parking garage around the corner, the shouts of the crowd echoing behind him. He didn't stop until he was deep in the concrete darkness of the garage, hiding behind a pillar. He leaned against the cold concrete, gasping for air, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked down at his box. The little plant had tipped over and soil had spilled out onto his suit jacket. He brushed it off with a shaking hand, tears finally spilling over his cheeks. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, the scene was peaceful and calm. The rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and clean. High up in the Hollywood Hills, the engine of a powerful motorcycle purred as it cruised along the empty winding roads. Keanu Reeves was riding. He wasn't wearing a helmet this time, letting the cool night air rush through his hair. He leaned into the curves, the bike moving like an extension of his body. There were no cameras here. No angry crowds. No judgment. He slowed down as he reached a lookout point that overlooked the entire city of Los Angeles. Below him, the grid of lights stretched out for miles, a glittering ocean of gold and white. The city was beautiful from up here. Quiet. Distant. He parked the bike and sat on the edge of a stone wall, looking out at the view. He took his phone out of his pocket. He saw the notifications, hundreds of them. News alerts, messages from friends, tags in viral posts. He knew the story had blown up. He knew that by tomorrow, everyone in the world would know what the bank manager had done. But Keanu didn't feel angry. He didn't feel the need for revenge. Watching the city lights, he just felt a sense of resolution. The manager had made his choice, and Keanu had made his. Keanu chose to take his business elsewhere. He chose not to argue, not to fight. He just walked away. He thought about the manager, the man with the red face and the expensive suit. Keanu wondered if the man was happy. He probably wasn't. People who treated others that way were rarely happy. Keanu felt a small pang of pity for him. To have so much, yet to be so driven by ego that you destroy your own life, it was a sad way to live. Keanu put his phone back in his pocket without opening the messages. He didn't need to read the comments to validate his worth. He knew who he was. He liked his life. He liked his simple clothes. He liked his freedom. He stood up, swung his leg back over the motorcycle, and kick-started the engine. The sound echoed off the canyon walls. He looked at the city one last time, taking a deep breath of the pine-scented air. Life is good, he whispered to himself. He twisted the throttle, and with the roar of the engine, he accelerated down the road, disappearing into the night, leaving the drama and the noise far behind him. Back at the bank, the cleaning crew was vacuuming the lobby. The lights were being turned off. The video of the incident continued to play on screens all over the world, but inside the building, the story was already old news. The next day, a new manager would arrive. The teller would likely be promoted for her integrity. And eventually, people would stop talking about the rude manager and the 10 million mistake. But for Sterling, the lesson would last a lifetime. Sitting alone in his apartment that night, staring at the blank television screen, he finally understood the truth that everyone else seemed to know but him. In the end, it doesn't matter what suit you wear, or how much money you have in the bank. The only thing that truly matters is how you treat the person standing in front of you. And unfortunately for Sterling, he had learned that lesson $10 million too late.